A direct tax wish list. The union budget is the day after tomorrow, and there is much expectation around direct taxes, including how they're administered. It's quite likely that a new direct tax code will not make its debut as expected because work, it appears, is still on, with some 22 subcommittees working furiously and also wading through some 6,500 suggestions. I reached out to Riaz Thingna, chartered accountant and partner at Thornton Bharat LLP, and I asked him to give us an overview on how tax collections have done in the last year and what he foresaw from the union budget this year and his wish list for the same.
Firstly, yes, the trends are pretty robust. So the overall collection of direct tax, which was budgeted at about 22 lakh crores, is likely to exceed by at least 70 to 80,000 crores for direct tax alone. At the same time, even GST collections are expected to rise by 9 to 10% over the previous year. So overall, the tax to GDP ratio, which is about 11.85% this year, and direct tax at 6.81% are both significantly higher than the previous year. So I think overall the robust collection, and with overall increase in GDP, there may be a little bit of a fall as far as tax buoyancy is concerned, but overall a very, very good collection. One additional thing I would like to talk about is that within direct tax, there has been a good nuance that the non-corporate tax has been rising as compared to corporate tax, and the difference is widening. So there is greater emphasis on non-corporate tax.
So when you say non-corporate, you mean personal tax?
Personal income tax and partnership firms, etc. That is rising. And now, when that is rising, there is scope for the finance minister to try and see how to boost consumption by giving some reliefs on that side.
If you were to now look at the budget specifically, let me ask you two kinds of things. One is administrative areas that you feel the budget needs to address, and then we could come to any specific clause or section within the tax that you feel we need to look at closely.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because on the administrative side, one thing clearly which is top of mind is how do you clear the backlog of litigation? The controversy management is a nightmare. Now, that is where we need some steps taken. Number one, just increase the capacity at the CIT appeal level, at the tribunal levels, to bring down the burden and the backlog. Second will be codify some of these time limits into the act itself so that they are strictly followed. The 6 months and 1 year limits should be strictly followed, which is another thing. Thirdly, and this is a long-standing demand, we try and bring in some tax mediation, and that is really going to help. And I think that would be one of the best practices to follow also. That tax mediation would definitely help in reducing the burden. So I think these are some of the areas where we need to take steps and reduce the level of litigation that is going on.
And when you say tax mediation, can you expand on that? I mean, what do we have today as of now and what we need to do?
So as of now, there is only an appellate process. So you have a disallowance, you go into appeal, whether it is a commissioner appeal or thereafter the income tax tribunals or thereafter the courts. The other alternative would be that wherever there is interpretational issue and where there are arguments, you have committee, a panel, which can sit across and discuss what should be the ideal way forward and what would be a fair way forward. So you don't even get to the controversy state. That would be the mediation process that I'm looking at. And it could work in a number of situations where there are genuine interpretational issues and not any evasion of tax.
And this is something that obviously many countries already have in some version or the other.
Absolutely. US is being the first example. So we do have tax mediation. I think that's something that we need to focus on.
Right. And are there any specific areas within the tax code? Now, of course, the tax code itself may not necessarily come in the way that was anticipated because there's still work going on. But anything within the tax code or the tax act?
Yeah. So, the tax code process has started. Various subcommittees have been set up, or I think about 22 subcommittees, 6,500 inputs have come in from various stakeholders, etc. So it'll take about a year to finish. Now, the focus of this tax code, it's a comprehensive review of the existing tax code. So the focus there, it's not a new code. So when you say that, the focus will be on simplification and rationalization. So while a lot of work has to be done, we could expect that during this budget, you could have some of those elements which I identified introduced towards that rationalization and simplification process.
What's an example that for you is, let's say, typifies the problem with the current code or the current act?
There are certain settled interpretational issues which we know that we can put an end to the litigation because there have been decisions of the Supreme Court, so that can be codified. There can be a reduction of the cross-referencing of sections, because when you have all these cross-referencing of sections, you definitely have more doubts create. But we can have a certain simplification of rates, TDS being the prime example. At TDS, we today have about 40 odd sections on TDS alone. Now, TDS was initiated with a dual purpose. One was to plug tax leakages, and the other was to create a documentation trail. Now, today, the documentation trail part is not important with all the digital tools available with the government. So it is only about plugging tax leakages. For that alone, 40 sections, of which about 3 or 4 sections contribute to about 85% of the collections. Why do we need that many sections with varying rates from 0.1% to 40%? And these rates just create a lot of confusion, create a lot of non-compliances. So I think towards that, we need something that reduces the number of those sections, number one, and at least brings in 3 or 4 different rates and not these multiplicity of rates. That is an area which can be looked at this point of time. Then, of course, tax rates for individuals, bringing it on par with corporates, etc. Those are the kind of things that one can expect.
Right. Riaz, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.